Hello and welcome back to my podcast. It's not going to be any more regular releasing and all, but I figure I'll do it this one time this semester anyway. Maybe I'll do another one. We'll see. I had a sermon I developed for my homiletics class that had to be designed, had to be written as though I was preaching at a youth rally. I thought, why not publish it on YouTube? And so I've entitled the sermon Limitations that Exceed Expectations, about Moses at the burning bush, Exodus chapter 4. And Exodus chapter 4, Moses is a shepherd in the wilderness of Sinai. He's keeping the sheep of his father-in-law. He got married years ago after running from Egypt as a murderer. And he's left all that life behind. It's been 40 years since then. All of a sudden, in the midst of this dry desert, this bush catches fire. Of course, he just expects it to burn, and it doesn't burn. It just is on fire, and it's not hurt. So he goes to check it out. And God speaks to him out of that bush. To pick up the reading, Exodus 4, 1 through 17, it says, And Moses answered and said, But behold, they will not believe me, nor hearken unto my voice. For they will say, The Lord hath not appeared unto thee. Again, if you're not familiar with the context, God has called Moses to lead Israel out of Egypt. And Moses is convinced he is not the man for the job, because of this and that reason that limits him and makes him simply not the right man. And the Lord said unto him, verse 2, What is that in thine hand? And he said, A rod. And he said, Cast it on the ground. And he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses fled from before it. And the Lord said unto Moses, Put forth thine hand, and take it by the tail. And he put forth his hand, and caught it. And it became a rod in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath appeared unto thee. And the Lord said furthermore unto him, Put now thine hand into thy bosom. And he put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous as snow. And he said, Put thine hand into thy bosom again. And he put his hand into his bosom again, and plucked it out of his bosom, and behold, it was turned again as his other flesh. And it shall come to pass, if they will not believe thee, neither hearken to the voice of the first sign, that they will believe the voice of the latter sign. And it shall come to pass, if they will not believe also these two signs, neither hearken unto thy voice, that thou shalt take of the water of the river, pour it upon the dry land, and the water which thou takest out of the river shall become blood upon the dry land. And Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heretofore, nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant, but I am slow of speech, and of a slow tongue. And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who hath made the dumb, or deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say. And he said, O my Lord, send, I pray thee, by the hand of him whom thou wilt send. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, Is not Aaron the Levite thy brother? I know that he can speak well. And also, behold, he cometh forth to meet thee, and when he seeth thee, he will be glad in his heart. And thou shalt speak unto him, and put words in his mouth, and I will be with thy mouth, and with his mouth, and will teach you what ye shall do. And he shall be thy spokesman unto the people, and even he shall be to thee instead of a mouth, and thou shalt be to him instead of God. And thou shalt take his rod in thine hand, wherewith thou shalt do signs. Now, I hate snakes, and so should you. Just saying, you should hate snakes. Those things are the worst. They hide in the grass, on the trails, in the shade at your house. Well, venomous snakes are a problem, and they can become quite large. These large venomous snakes are problematic. They instill fear in everyone. The black mamba, for instance, in Africa, one of the deadliest, In fact, it can stand up to 6 feet. Yeah, stand up to 6 feet on its tail. Run up to 30 miles per hour. Oh, and it loves to hang out in fruit trees and orchards just above the person's head that picks a fruit off those trees. And this is an interesting note. Some people think that this particular snake was the original snake that Satan used to tempt Eve in the garden because of where it likes to hang out in the trees just above the person's head who's picking the fruit. It's kind of interesting. But snakes pose problems, and they also provoke curiosity because of their power and their fear. Now, Egyptians in the Bible times, they both feared and revered snakes. The fear and the dread of them permeate every culture: Egypt, America, Africa, everywhere. Snakes bring terror and dread everywhere they go. Us Americans, of course, were intrigued by their dangerous and quiet habits. You can find YouTube videos all over. And the Egyptians, well, they feared them for this reason, but they also promoted them to divinity, like made them a god. Americans, we study snakes for money. Egyptians study snakes for safety, protection, and so as not to incur the wrath of the gods. So we see the influence of snakes, but Egyptians saw them differently, as items symbolizing power. They saw snakes as divinity. They worshipped them through sacred, quote-unquote, sacred sketches of them in other lives, guarding gods. Their very nature brought divine fear, like fear of their gods. Pharaohs used them to show strong sudden authority. Peasants would stay away from them lest they lose their homes. Pharaohs would again use them to symbolize power. Well, God, in this passage, used it to symbolize almost, you could say, a transfer of power. God did not see the snakes the same way Egypt did, but they were used as a sign because they were symbolic. In this text, we'll see that God used things in Moses' life to prepare and equip him for the command he was given and the call placed on his life. Now we'll see here that God's first wonder would prove his power in the life of an insignificant man. Moses saw himself as insignificant. It's a good place to start. We know he was very significant. Moses just did not see himself that way. Now he saw himself as less, as an incapable man, but certainly insignificant. Now, it's interesting. The Lord told Moses to cast down his rod. Interesting. He was a shepherd. Shepherds had rods, staffs, and they were crucial to him. The shepherd's rod was thick. As a thick stick, it was straight and heavy. Sometimes it was equipped with bits of metal on the heavy end, the top, for protection from thieves and predators. The shepherd's rod was useful when fighting a lion, or a bear, a wolf, or any other predator that came against the sheep. It was a defense mechanism for the shepherd when a predator closed in. This defense mechanism suddenly transformed from being his protection to being his greatest fear. Here in Exodus, he dropped it, he cast it down, and it became a serpent, a snake. You're not going to rely on a snake to protect you, you're going to run from a snake. So his rod became a snake. Of course, Moses fled, which seems to imply actually that he got far away. He may have even sought shelter in the mountain. Either way, he was gone. God told him, however, to take the snake in his hand by the tail. Go reach out, grab a snake by the tail. What's the last thing you want to do to a snake? Sneak up to it and grab it by the tail. So don't grab a snake by the tail, right? A snake will recoil and strike. You'll grab it and you'll feel its hot breath, and its fangs will sink into your face. Well, Moses knew this too well. But God commanded him, so he reached out, came closer, and of course, he expected hot breath in his face, and fangs to pierce his flesh when he grabbed the tail. But instead, he took the tail caught the snake, drew it in, and rather than feeling hot breath and fangs sinking into his flesh, he drew in a thick, sturdy shepherd rod, the same one that had aided him day and night for possibly 40 years, for several years in the desert. When Moses took the snake by the tail, it's like God transformed the snake and restored him his rod. Okay, so why is this significant? Why was Moses' rod turned to a snake? I have actually always wondered this. Why was his rod turned to a snake? Well, there's actually several articles about that describe Egyptian culture, of course, including snakes, the significance of snakes. According to these articles, snakes were a very important part of the Egyptian culture. I have some articles here. They were worshipped as deity. Several articles, they have some silly names, I think, I don't know, but Hair and Death in Ancient Egypt and digitalcommons.memphis. There, some blogs from universities. I found several things, actually. The Egyptian kings were revered about their snake gods. They were revered because of protection and kingship. The cobra symbolized their goddess, Wadjet, who protected the king and Lower Egypt. Which makes me wonder what kind of serpent Moses' rod became. Like, did it become a cobra? Why he fled from it? Why he may have feared more to pick it up? Maybe he remembered that goddess that he used to be a worshiper of, perhaps, or at least he was around the worship of. I don't know. It was a symbol of protection and kingship. It was a symbol of cosmic order versus chaos. Particular serpents supposedly maintained order in the universe. And then rebirth and immortality, snakes shed their skin. So Egyptians connected them with renewal, transformation, eternal life, magic, healing, and danger. Venomous snakes were feared, but Egyptians, they believed they had magical and healing powers. And then local cults and guardian deities. So in Egyptian religion, several goddesses could appear as snakes. So the Egyptians often received them as manifestations of deities. It kind of makes me wonder what went through Moses' head when he saw the snake, when he saw his rod become a snake. The snakes would have not only made him quite scared, perhaps, but maybe they reminded him of all those pagan deities he forsook in Egypt. And then another interesting thing. The snake is interesting. The rod. That was a symbol of royal deity and authority in Egypt. The snake, of course, symbolized Egyptian divinity and power. The rod and the snake symbolize almost the exact same thing. So I thought through Moses, God would come with power and authority and free Israel from Egypt's grasp. So then I thought this must have been done so that Moses understood he did not need to fear what Pharaoh could do, but rather he must deliver the word of the Lord. Why I say that? The rod symbolized power and divinity. The rod was a symbol of royal deity and authority. The snake was a symbol of divinity and power. They're basically the same thing, right? Subtle distinctions that are actually quite significant. But the snake and the rod. The pharaohs used a shepherd rod to symbolize their authority in the land. And the snakes were like guardians to that authority. So it's like the Lord is saying, it's like the Lord wanted Moses specifically to go to Pharaoh and to not be afraid. Moses thought, perhaps, I'll get to that later. But Moses did not need to fear going to Pharaoh. Just because Moses felt afraid and insufficient did not mean he was not the right man for the job. Same goes for me and you on our level. Just because you feel afraid or sufficient or insufficient doesn't mean you are incapable of the task. And so when God gives us a command, He knows He's called the person He wants to do it because we can do it. If we feel like we can't, that's okay. It's not about how we feel. It's about the God who calls. Moses was called by God, and he just didn't feel like he was the one. But God was the one who made the decision. And when God commands us to tell people about Him, to go soul winning, to be a witness for Him, to witness to our coworkers, our neighbors, our friends, our family, these can be scary situations, awkward. These can be whatever they end up being. But God knows we are fully able. Not only that, He also knows how crucial it is for them to hear His news. When He commands us to separate ourselves from the world unto Him, He knows we can. His commandments aren't grievous. He knows we can fulfill them. But as we see with the Lord instructing Moses to go to Pharaoh, He's really not worried about how we feel. He takes it into account. He deals with us about it. He's compassionate toward us. But really, He's more worried about us accomplishing His task, us obeying His commandments. He'll help us with the fear alongside of it. He'll help us with the worry and everything else that Moses and me and you experience. When God says He wants us to know Him, He says it because we can. And when He tells us to study His Word, to pray, to arrange our day so we can know Him, He says it because we can and because we should. My point is, no matter our schedules, no matter what we believe are our limitations, no matter what we believe is right or wrong about what God is telling us to do. For example, Moses didn't believe he was the right man to lead Israel out. Do you believe you're the right person to talk to that coworker, to talk to your family member about Christ? Do you believe you're the right person to, say, head up a ministry at your church, or to be part of a particular ministry at your church? And yet, I believe God's called me to do this. I believe He wants me to help in this area. I just don't think I'm the right person to, and that's okay. God commands us, God calls us, and if we don't believe we're the right person, we simply need to ask for the Lord to equip us. God promised, Moses, he would be with his mouth. He would teach him what he should say. He would equip him for the task. God will do the same thing for us. God called Moses to a position that demanded requirements Moses had. God calls us to tasks that are suited for us. Moses had the requirements. Well, what if I don't? It's okay. God will equip you. The first wonder He performed for Moses was that his power would be on an insignificant man. God would give Moses what he needed to accomplish His will. God's will. First wonder proved His power in the life of an insignificant man. And His second wonder showed His will to deliver Israel from bondage through Moses. Here, God does something interesting. He tells Moses, put his hand into his bosom, right? Put his hand on his chest. Essentially, he would be kind of feeling his heart rate. There's something about the bosom that indicated security and warmth, and even love, like a mother for a baby, mother for her child. In daily life in the ancient Near East there, the bosom was where you carried what was precious or close. To have something in one's bosom meant to hold with kindness, with secrecy, or with intimacy. And so it's interesting that God would have Moses put his hand on his bosom and pluck it out. I'm not saying there's significance with him putting his hand on his chest. I'm saying God was trying to show Moses something, and He was using an illustration. And there was a purpose behind this illustration. Moses did what the Lord instructed. Put his hand on his chest, plucked it back out. He was wearing that robe, plucked it back down. Then, when he plucks it back out, there's leprosy. His hand's infected. And it's clearly gross. It's turned white, abnormally white. He was probably an olive-skinned man, perhaps even a black man, I don't know. But it definitely wasn't white like my hand is. But that thing was diseased like nothing. He was seriously sick. In Leviticus in the Old Testament, sure, this was after Moses in the burning bush, but there's a biblical truth. In the Old Testament, later we find that leprosy is a picture of corruption and sin. Moses was instructed by his mother in the way of the Lord. In the book of Acts, we find Moses was learned in the way of the Egyptians, but he was also recognizing who his God was, who his people really were. He wanted to separate from Egypt and identify with his people. He actually, in his heart, chose to believe that the God of Israel was better than the gods of Egypt, despite his wealth, despite his position. He thought their state was better. So I wonder how much he knew about God, how much he knew God demanded. With the leprosy, I wonder if Moses realized or thought there had to be a message in it for him. Leprosy was a picture of sin and corruption. It was often inflicted by God's judgment for sin. So when Moses withdrew his hand and saw his hand leprous, I think he perceived something. And I think it was this. In his heart, he knew he was no different from Pharaoh. He harbored sin and fear in the things of the world in his heart. When he pulled his hand out and it was leprous, he must have thought, I wonder if God's saying my heart is just as bad as Pharaoh. My heart is just as corrupted, or just as corruptible as Pharaoh's is corrupted. Deep down, it truly is what Moses was. Deep down, Moses, just like we, are corruptible, just as Pharaoh was corrupted. But when Moses put his hand again, when God told Moses to put his hand again to his bosom and draw back out, it was clean. God is the only one who can cleanse and make someone clean from sin and corruption. Despite Moses' heart, despite that he was a sinful man, that he murdered a man and never got it right, that he murdered a man and became a fugitive and a con man, and would likely face punishment or something for his crime when he went back to Egypt. Despite those things on his record, God could make Moses clean. Consequently, when Israel came out of Egypt, God could make them clean from the corruption of Egypt. He could bring them out. He could cleanse them from unrighteousness. God is the only one that can save our souls. He's the only one that can make us clean and presentable unto him. So God wanted to use Moses regardless of his sin, regardless of what he thought held him back. For 40 years in Egypt, 40 years before in Egypt, I mentioned this really briefly just earlier, but for 40 years in Egypt, Moses had gotten angry with a man. He got that fresh glimpse of his brethren in Israel. He felt for them, and perhaps he thought he's a chief ruler of Egypt. Should he not stand up for them? They're his people. Well, one day, he must have been thinking about this over and over, and it must have been on his mind, on his heart, because one of the taskmasters was beating one of the slaves. Nothing out of the ordinary. But this time, he couldn't take it. And he acted on his anger, interrupted the beating, and ended up killing that Egyptian taskmaster. No small deal. The chief ruler of Egypt had just killed one of his own in cold blood. That was basically tyranny. He had betrayed his country. So he buried the man, he buried his sin, and fled. Hadn't really looked back, it doesn't seem, until now. Even though Moses had buried that sin, he did not know that God had buried it as well, and God had forgiven him. Moses' heart was as corrupted as Pharaoh's, but God could cleanse him of his sin just like he cleansed him from leprosy. He could still be used, and God would use him and could still use him to deliver Israel. For Israel, the healing of leprosy, these two signs will be shown to Israel. The healing of leprosy meant that God had not only had power over Pharaoh, but he also had power over sin and corruption. And as I mentioned, he would cleanse Israel and purify them if they would leave Egypt to become his. So if Israel didn't believe the first time that God could take the power of Egypt and make it so that Israel would walk out. If they didn't believe that first sign, they would believe the second sign, that God could make them free from sin, and could cleanse them from Egypt, could bring them out. And of course, if they didn't believe that one, then there would be a third sign to follow, that God would show them also, when the river would turn to blood. And I believe God would show them that He's the one who gives life. Egypt is not their source of life. God can give them life, give them a brand new life outside of this world, outside of Egypt. He could give them a brand new life. And that's what the third sign would show them. It wasn't the Egyptian gods that had power over nature, like they believed in Egypt, nor was nature a god for Israel to join Egypt in worshiping. They had to be part of the Egyptian culture. We don't have to be part of this world's culture. We are supposed to be called out of it. We're supposed to be out of it, separated out of it. And God gives us life. God's the one to depend upon. God wished to show Israel in Egypt. He was the one with the power. He had the power to transform and restore. His might's greater than Egypt. His heart soft and tender also toward his people. His anger could be kindled, and Egypt had kindled it. But if they believed God, He would open wide His arms of love and cleanse them from every evil way. And so the blood would flow to show that God had power over life and death. Because the gods of Egypt are powerless, and if they're powerless, then those dwelling there would see there's a power beyond this world. Egypt would recognize their gods and themselves. Their gods, their culture, they themselves were insufficient. Israel would see that God had indeed visited them, remembering them, and had kept His promise to free them. The third sign would confirm that God had wished to give Israel life outside of Egypt. It would transform them and cleanse them so that they could be His people. I hope that makes sense. God's doing all these things to show Moses, I'll deliver you from your corruption, from your sin. Israel, I'll deliver you from your sin-stained ways. And Christians at large, I deliver you from the sin of this world, and I bring you out. God's promise of help. This is the third thing. God's promise of help showed God's determination to deliver through insufficient leadership. Moses just didn't believe he was right. But Moses protested, declared, I'm incapable of accomplishing this task. He couldn't speak well. If he tried, he'd fail. Why was Moses refusing? Why would Moses disobey? Why would Moses refuse to surrender to the Lord's will? Clearly, God could do whatever He wanted to do through Moses. Moses refused to surrender to the Lord's will because he did not believe the Lord could use him. Then, when Moses finally said, you know what, just send whoever you want to send, as in, I just don't want to go. I'll support whoever you wish. Well, God got mad, and He demanded of Moses, who made man's mouth? He demanded that he remind himself, who made men with physical limitations? Suppose you can't speak well. Did you know that I made your mouth? Suppose you cannot walk. I made your feet. Suppose you cannot talk. I made your tongue. You think you can't do this, but I made you. If I made you with something that you couldn't do, but I called you to do it, I can adjust you like a bolt. If God made the bolt, fashioned the bolt, if there was a helmet, say that a man makes, and he welds it together, if there's an adjustment, and he knows welding very well, he can adjust something on that helmet. God's the one that made Moses, fashioned him. If there was an adjustment God needed to make in Moses, God could make it. So we tend to believe we're not really the ones God wants to use or could use. We don't meet the requirements, so we think. But God will give us grace. He'll give us wisdom. He'll give us strength. When we doubt, to believe He's able to use us and to use what we have. If God made these people the way He did, He could change them any way He wanted, to make them anything He wanted them to be. So even if Moses' excuses were so, even if they were legitimate, God would adjust His limitations so He could use them. So Moses' excuses were invalid. They just were. There's some interesting history about Moses' possible identity in history in Egypt. And there's an article called Is This Moses? From the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology. They say there's a figure of history, Sen in Egypt, that is highly likely, very likely, biblical Moses, as 95% of his account matches with Moses' account. He was taken from peasants, from the Nile, placed in a royal family. He was gifted, able-bodied, wide variety of interests, responsibilities. This man had more titles than he could juggle. He had incredible trust in the courts. He was the lady Pharaoh's daughter's personal tutor. The Pharaoh's daughter, Hatshepsut, her daughter's personal tutor, Hatshepsut's closest friend, a royal advisor, architect, administrator, academician, royal military commander, potentially a second pharaoh for a time, trusted royal steward, which would make him one of Egyptians' divinity members, one of their almost worship, one of the people that they would have worshipped perhaps. He was high up there. He was learned in all the ways of the Egyptians, as the book of Acts says. Now, some people may think, what does that have to do with anything? Some people may be fascinated. I hope I presented it okay. My point in telling you this was that from the inscriptions and details given. No, that was the wrong part to say. My point in telling you this was that Moses had exactly what was needed to accomplish the task. God didn't call someone who was insufficient, or limited, or incapable of accomplishing this. God called someone who could do it. God called someone that even if he felt incapable, that he would equip him. He'd given him the mind, and he'd given him the mind in Egypt to accomplish this leadership role. He'd given them the heart as a shepherd to lead these people spiritually. He gave him the experience, mind, skills, gifts, everything. So it is with us. God gives us experiences, minds, skills, gifts that we need to accomplish his commands, to fulfill his call. He equips us. Moses' excuses were invalid. Here's why I believe ours are as well. Because God gives us exactly what we need to accomplish his will. No matter our limitations, God has a plan for us, just like God had a plan for Moses, despite what he believed limited him. Don't try to escape the call. Moses tried to escape it, and God was angry. We want God to be pleased with us, not angry. Just submit to him. What we see as insignificant, God will use to work marvelously in the lives of those in bondage. Now, Moses believed his past made him unbelievable. He believed his shepherd's rods and his responsibilities made him insufficient. He believed he was demoted, that he couldn't do much. His position in life just wasn't adequate. God had other ideas. He had other plans. He said, no, I put you there on purpose. You got a heart. And you also have a mind. I'm going to use those things and place you here. All these things that God did, all the signs, the leprosy, the snake, the promise of blood flowing in Egypt to show life was elsewhere for Israel. All these things were for Moses and Israel to see. The Lord would lead them out. He would cleanse them from every evil way, and he would give them new life. God has called us out of this world. He has given us his power so we can be a witness and help lead others out. He will cleanse us from every evil way. He'll save us, make us clean and presentable unto him, and we can have abundant life outside of this world. Now, a man looks at the ground, at some mud, and his friend stomps over to him and says, "What you doing?" After some silence, he asks him again, "What you doing?" Finally, he says, "Dude, this mud is still the same mud. What is the deal? Why are you staring at it?" The man responds gently and with mystery. "Because I have an idea, and I'm thinking it through." "What are you thinking?" The man picks up a container beside him, scoops up a large chunk of mud. "Follow me and I'll show you." They arrive in the garage and the man plops the mud onto a wheel at the table. The wheel and machine is obviously handmade and operated. The mud is placed on the machine. Then the man taps the gauge on the bottom that prompts the wheel to spin on the top. He places the mud on the machine, and the man spins it, prepares it, and whirs it around, faster and faster and faster, slowly putting on more mud, more water, more mud, more water. this continues for some time. Pottery starts with clay, which begins as mud. Most people see wet dirt, says the man who scooped up the dirt and the mud. Pottery starts with clay, begins as mud. Most people see wet dirt, but I see a new vase for my wife in my anniversary next week. You know she loves roses. So I will make her a brand new, handmade pottery vase for her roses for our anniversary present. You see, this man's a potter, and the potter looks at mud and sees a flowery vase. He has a vision for that piece of clay that's worth nothing to most. So God looks at us broken and dirty people and sees a beautiful work of art, something he can use, a vessel fit for him. God will turn our insignificance into his. God will turn our insignificance into something useful through his sufficiency. When God sees opportunities, our limitations will exceed man's expectations. Now, man will often bury their sin in the most desolate of places, but God sees it. We'll forget about it, or we'll feel bad about it and never deal with it, but God sees it, and he wants to forgive it and cleanse us from it. We will run from our past and hide from it, but God will confront us with our past. He'll expose us, and then he'll reveal he forgives us. He wants to forgive us. He wants to cleanse us from it. We sulk in our sin, and we stay dirty. We stay where we are, afraid that we're castaways. We're no good. God comes to us and says, if you let me, I'll make you something useful, wonderful, and even beautiful in my eyes, and I will make you something you never thought you would be. I don't mean another Moses. I mean a useful vessel. You'll have a part. You'll have a purpose. And God will greatly use you to help that person and that person and that person know him better. So, others who seem to have it all together, like Pharaoh, may not experience what one like Moses would experience. But even Pharaoh could experience what Moses had if he would have submitted to God. Pharaoh would have also been cleansed and delivered from his sin. He could have been delivered from his evil way. Pharaoh could have had the same opportunity to be used of God. Me and you had the same opportunity to be used of God as Moses did. If you'll submit ourselves to God, let him use us. And if we will just say, yes, I'll do that task. I'll do what you've commanded in your word. I'll be that witness. I'll serve you in this capacity. I'll fulfill your calling. Because I don't believe that I can. But if you want me to, you'll make it so I'm able to. God calls us to believe that he will use us as he desires to use us. God will turn our insufficiency into a sufficient vessel for his use. I hope that is an encouragement, and I went way longer than I intended to. But I hope that you realize that your limitations, God can use to exceed man's expectations. Because when we agree, when we surrender to the Lord, then God will use us. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that was an encouragement to you and that provoked you to serve God.